Hi, I'm Sheena Reagan, Manager of Business Development at BC Ferries. We're very excited to welcome you to the session today on the blue economy. During today's session, our panelists are going to explore the vast expertise on Vancouver Island in ocean-based industries that will position it to become a leader in innovation, conservation, and job creation that will have both social and economic benefits for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities up and down the coast. We hope you enjoy today's session. Please come and visit us at our virtual booth. We'd love to get to know you. Thank you very much and enjoy the summit.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the session on the blue economy, Vancouver Island's next economic engine. We're very fortunate today to have Jennifer, Kate, and Charlie that are going to make presentations before we start our questions and answers. And we'll start with Kate. If you want to load your slides up, that would be great.
Okay, I will. I'm sharing my screen now. And here we go. Great, so I'll just begin. Thanks so much for inviting me to be with the group today. And I'm happy to really talk about what Ocean Networks Canada is doing in the context of this new international report that came out earlier this year. And so what we're talking about is really the blue economy, which the OECD estimated to be reached about $3 trillion US by 2030. But they did another update last year where they decided that it was critically important to ensure that not only the fundamental marine industries would grow, but we need to ensure that there's sustainability built in to the growth of the blue economy. And that led to this report, Transformation for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, that was put together by the leaders of 14 countries. It leverages the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It also speaks well in terms of alignment with the federal government's ocean health and ocean wealth programs. And they've identified 5 areas of transformation that would be 100% achieved by 2030. And in the details of this report, there's also 60 priority actions. Prime Minister Trudeau was part of this ocean panel, and in terms of his leadership, he's dedicated to achieving these goals as well. Just a little bit about Ocean Networks Canada. We are an ocean observatory infrastructure. We operate infrastructure to understand all aspects of the ocean, from currents to life to the interaction with the continent, but also in areas like off the west coast of BC. We are also monitoring the ocean in terms of spreading centers, subduction, earthquakes, tsunamis, and all of the venting that comes out of the hot vents and the cold vents along our continental margin. And we do this by operating telecommunication cables. Our biggest one is off the west coast of Vancouver Island, and it is about a 900-kilometer long cable with nodes, and those nodes have extension cables that go to sensors that sit beneath the seafloor, on the seafloor, in the water column. And then we've expanded our sensor network to include those on land that look over at the ocean. And also we have autonomous systems in the Juan de Fuca Strait, a cable in the Southern Salish Sea or Georgia Strait, and a cable in Saanich Inlet. We've also expanded our network, as I'll explain, to include other community observatories. And so all of these data actually have a role in supporting transformational actions for the ocean economy. So I'm just going to go through the high level of these priorities that was established by this global panel. And so the first is make ocean knowledge available to everyone. And so we do that at Ocean Networks Canada because we have a big data platform, data management system. We have our principles are no stranded data. We monitor and do remote troubleshooting of all the sensor networks, robust metadata, QA/QC, interactive controls by anyone who has access to the network, and most importantly, our data are broad, open access, and we can allow broad dissemination of data. And then we also develop tools for researchers, educators, the public, and now we're moving into tools for industry. And because of this data management system, we now have smaller observatories on the west coast of British Columbia, in the Arctic, and now we have partnerships in Labrador, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia. We also collaborate with all relevant partners as part of the transformational goals. And so our collaborations are work with, for example, the Port of Vancouver on understanding noise in the Southern Salish Sea to protect the southern resident killer whales. We installed a very special hydrophone array that actually can detect whales, but it also measures ship noise. And with that, companies like JASCO, who are experts in ocean acoustics, can combine ship traffic data, AIS data, with the ship noise that were recorded. They recorded over 3,000 ship noises, and they can model in real time ocean noise in a busy port area like the Port of Vancouver. This information is important to actually reduce the noise and help protect southern residents. We also have monitoring the marine protected area off our coast. This is the Endeavour segment of the Wanda Fuka Ridge, and we do this in partnership with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And we're growing to expand other areas of marine protection in order to achieve the transformational goals in the global organization that was put together that included Prime Minister Trudeau. We're working with the shellfish aquaculture industry to measure ocean acidification, which could put that industry at risk. So we have a real-time monitoring system near the biggest shellfish farming area in British Columbia, and we collect those data in real time, and we'll be working with them to develop data products that will help keep their farms safe and free from the harms of ocean acidification. And that's to ensure that this kind of farming can continue and provide food for all of us. We also use the data to actually understand the impact on the entire food web, and that's the scientific part of the observatory in Bain Sound. It's important to also have local to global observation, and we're doing that at Ocean Networks Canada in conjunction with Indigenous knowledge. So we have Indigenous partnerships. They started in the north in Cambridge Bay in 2012, where we installed a very small observatory system in that area. And we learned that the community was very interested in the thickness of the sea ice for which we measured from this system. That was an aha moment for us, where we realized we need to have community observatories for many coastal communities in Canada so they can make their own data, have their own data, and have the power of that data to actually challenge any actions or climate impacts in their area. This is just a picture of what it looked like in 2012. We have newer designs. We complement it with empowering communities to gather their own oceanographic data with an instrument and a tablet. All these data are high quality oceanographic data that allow communities to extend their ocean footprint in their region. We now have partnerships across the country with Indigenous communities, and you can see this on the map here. And finally, in terms of Indigenous engagement, we in 2019, just before COVID, we hosted over 50 Indigenous communities at the International Conference on Ocean Observations. It was the first time that we were able to bring Indigenous communities as stakeholders to this once in 10-year conference. And it allowed these communities to be represented to say to the technical people who develop ocean observations what they needed in order to be protected from the impacts of climate change. They resulted in a Coastal Indigenous Peoples Declaration that was then shared with the Intergovernmental Ocean Commissioner, who was at the conference. And finally, in this report, they proposed to advance carbon capture and storage in the subsea bed at Ocean Networks Canada with many partners. We are looking towards developing technology to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, hopefully by 2038, when it will be needed in order to keep the planet below 1.5 degrees C so that humans can survive for 7+ generations to come. It's about capturing CO2 from the atmosphere on an ocean platform, pumping that CO2 in through the water column into the subsea floor. When you inject it into basalt, the rock type basalt, it will turn into rock in a matter of years. So it becomes the most durable sequestration for CO2 in the world. This is a conceptual picture of it, and we were funded by the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. We're now doing the feasibility study, and we were one of the 100 and change selected by the MacArthur Foundation. Our next step is to do a demonstration at Cascadia Basin on our Neptune network, because it's the best location globally for a demonstration of this type of new technology. And I just wanted to share all of the things that we're doing at Ocean Networks Canada to help Canada be a leader in the transformational document for sustainable ocean development. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate. It was really interesting to hear about all the things that are happening at Ocean Networks Canada. We'll go to Charlie now to talk about what the provincial government's been up to.
Great. Thanks, George, and thanks, Kate, for that presentation. That was really great. Could I just check and see if you guys can see what I'm looking at? So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlie Short, and I work with the provincial government in the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. And specifically, I work primarily in that coastal zone space and in the marine space on a variety of what I would call sort of resource management planning initiatives. So today I'd like to speak to everyone about the value of doing this kind of strategic and operational planning in the marine space and how that can sort of facilitate and foster more resilient coastal communities in the context of the broader blue economy discussion, both nationally and internationally. So as many of you will be well aware, our marine environment is both physically and biologically diverse and home to many iconic species such as salmon and killer whale, like you just saw in those neat graphics from Kate's presentation. Also, the majority of British Columbians call the quote unquote the coast home, with over 70% of the population residing in that area and over 300 communities that are tied to the specific coastal zone.
Charlie, I'm just going to stop you. Can you go to a full screen? We're seeing.
Whoops, should I be starting over then? Because I thought I'm on full screen here. How does that look?
That's great.
Should I start again?
No, you can just go, keep going.
The other thing to note about the marine environment is the jurisdictional roles and responsibilities when it comes to allocating space and making decisions in this environment is very complicated. And in general, many overlapping jurisdictions are present in this marine space. So we have the federal government's roles and responsibilities, the provincial governments, First Nations governments, local governments. And so often in my line of work, there are significant initiatives occurring that are involve multiple levels of collaboration across levels of government to make things work and comprehensive and integrated in nature. And specifically to BC, our oceans economy is very, very significant. So we have commissioned a report recently over the last year in collaboration with Canada on the value of the marine economy and the ocean sector at large in regards to the provincial economy. So we're sitting about, and these are sort of rough figures now as we finalize our final report, which will be made public in a few months' time. But we're sitting at about $17 billion of direct, indirect, and induced contributions of the variety of ocean sectors in the provincial economy. Over 150,000 direct jobs, indirect jobs, and what was interesting about this analysis is that we were able to kind of dissect where that was coming from in terms of the northern part of the province versus the southern part of the province, because of our infrastructure, population, demographics, and everything is quite varied when you move from the Alaska border to the Washington border in British Columbia. And so interestingly, about 91% of the oceans sector related economy generation, sort of GDP contribution was from the southern part of the province. And that kind of makes sense when you think about infrastructure and networks of roads and export capacity and the port development that's going on. So it was kind of interesting to see, and this was the first time we were able to do that at a geographic scale like this. Interestingly, in the north, we have seafood development and transportation as the sort of dominant marine sectors, and in the south, we have transportation, but also running close to the second is tourism and recreation. And what we haven't been able to sort of pin down quite specifically are the sort of intangible values that the ocean and coastal environment provides that are not necessarily traditional economic sectors that we would generate statistics on. So things like tradition, recreation, from the public sense that you're just, and the value of things like carbon storage, the value of things like an estuary as it relates to fisheries production and so forth. So we're going to be sort of focusing our sort of efforts, trying to understand that a bit better here in British Columbia. There's been some global studies, but nothing really specific to BC. So you might be wondering how this all sort of breaks down. This is what the broader picture looks like. You can see that transportation and tourism and recreation sort of dominate the economic landscape as it relates to the ocean activities here in BC. And then you have a variety of activities that are happening across the coast that contribute towards this. Now, I will note that we do think that we need to do some fine tuning on our numbers, and we do think that tourism and recreation may be underrepresented up to about $3 billion. It depends on how we dissect the data. So we're working with some of our economists to sort of fine tune that. So it could increase overall in the coming months. We can also look at where the major sources of employment are, how the spread is across the variety of ocean sectors, as well as a deeper dive within a particular sector. So if we looked at seafood as a broad section of the economy, well, what does that actually mean? We can break that down into sort of processing, aquaculture, and wild harvest and get a better picture and understanding of that, both geographically and across space and over time. We did do a similar study to this about, almost 12, 15 years ago in 2005, and we were seeing a significant sort of annualized growth in a variety of sectors, notably transportation, seafood production, and tourism. And so we're starting to see some trends. So we're going to be looking at how we can kind of leverage that and also plan for that into the future if these trends persist. We're also seeing slight advances in aquaculture, ocean tech, and biotechnology as well across the ocean sector. So the question being, in relation to the Decade of the Oceans initiative, is how can we sustain this growth over time, and how can we foster this growth in a resilient and equitable way as we move forward? And so, because of course growth doesn't occur without some implications on our natural and sort of social environments. So we do see increased stressors on our natural marine environments and coastal environments, as well as increased stressors to culture and community as well, depending on what we're talking about. So how do we harness this blue economy, and how do we do that in a way that is sustainable over the long run? And there are a variety of ways of doing this. One is to sort of plot a vision and have a bit of a plan for this, both internationally and nationally. So the federal government has released a blue economy strategy in the last year, and has been collating comments and input from a variety of people. And then the other part of this is like, well, how would we actually get there? How do you actually operationally work with others to sort of plot out that future? And that's where the concept of marine spatial planning comes in, and the province has been engaged in this for quite some time. And for those that aren't familiar with this, marine spatial planning is just a way of working with people and levels of government to sort of map out our collective values when it comes to this marine environment, and map out where we want to be in the future. Not just in terms of a vision and a sort of strategic mapping exercise, but a lot of times it's actually spatially depicting where you want to see activities occur and not occur in time and space. And so when you do this with the perspective of looking at economies, the environment, and social objectives all at the same time, you can present a pretty integrated and holistic picture that reflects the values of local communities and broader jurisdictions in terms of scale. So we've seen this happen locally here in British Columbia. There's been a lot of localized plans that have been done in the marine environment, but also internationally. And so some of the benefits that we're seeing over the last, say 10 years of me being involved in this work, but also across the globe, is that we can kind of when you do that, and when you get a common vision, a collective vision around how you want to develop a particular area, and or how do you want to harness the economic opportunities in a particular area, you tend to get less conflict, and there's a sort of an easier path towards that end. And so, in the context of BC, where we do have these plans, we have been witnessing sort of better certainty and security in terms of businesses investing in a particular area, as well as management efficiencies. And also, we're also witnessing a lot of stability and complementarity between user groups that maybe would have been in conflict if we hadn't done this up front. So in BC, a lot of our work has been in the north, and I'll get to that in a second, but in the southern part of the province. And so if you're looking at this map, that's the southern shelf and the Strait of Georgia. We're setting the stage for this to come. We haven't developed comprehensive, quote unquote, marine plans for this area quite yet. But we have developed a bunch of tools, data sets, and knowledge products that can be used to facilitate that discussion moving forward. And in fact, right now we're working with Canada and some of the First Nations to help set the stage for marine spatial planning in the southern part of the province. It hasn't quite got there yet, though. On the flip side, in the north, we have done quite extensive marine planning in the northern part of the province. And so in 2015, the province of BC and several First Nations in the northern part of this marine space developed 4 spatial plans with specific zoning that is depicted on the map here that is recommending space be used for particular purposes. And so all those different blobs on the map that you see represent various degrees of either conservation objectives or special management areas that are there to guide economic growth along the coast. And so the advantage of doing this, well, one, it's a collective vision between 17 First Nations governments in the province, plus the local community. So that's invaluable, in my opinion, but also collective recommendations on how people would like to see the space being used. And what this does is it helps put communities in the position to be resilient over time and put communities in a position to advance economic objectives that are already supported from the beginning. So there's no question for someone to come in and invest. They already know that particular activity would be supported. So that's been very helpful. And we're in our 5th year of implementation on this particular exercise, and we're seeing a lot of benefits from that. So looking ahead, a few things to note. One is we have a current government that has committed to develop a more comprehensive and integrated vision for our coast. So this government has committed to develop a coastal marine strategy to protect and sustain coastal habitats while growing coastal economies. So that is something to look forward to, I would say, in the future. And right now is it's a bit of a policy vacuum in the province where we don't have a comprehensive articulated vision for this particular place of the coast at this scale. And so while we haven't developed products to engage folks on at this point in time, that'll come in the next year and a bit, but we do see a bunch of themes emerging around knowledge, the economy, human well-being, and ecosystem health. And we can leverage a lot of the work that's going on not only internationally, but nationally and localized, so we can build that particular strategy that'll help sustain and provide for resilient economies. And as folks may know, there are other strategies at play here too, notably the federal Canada's Blue Oceans Economy Strategy, but also other related strategies around salmon and around watersheds that we hope to integrate and coordinate as we move forward. So lots to look forward to, and really excited to be a part of the discussion today. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Charlie. Again, super informative, and I think we all look forward to reading that report when it comes out. So now we're going to go to Jennifer and hear about what she's been up to.
Just getting ready to share my screen. Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I'm Jennifer Woodland. I'm the CEO of New Chalmers Seafood, a fully integrated seafood company owned by 5 Indigenous communities from the west coast of Vancouver Island. But I'm here today with my chair of the Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance hat on to talk about Canadian seafood and the blue economy opportunity. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm on the Weewakai, Weewakam, and Comox First Nations territories. I'm coming to you from my home in Campbell River. So what is a blue economy? This is what the World Bank defines as a blue economy, but I've asked all my Indigenous colleagues what they felt a blue economy was as we were getting ready to have input into the Canada Blue Economy Strategy. And they all said the same thing. It's basically how they've always managed their marine resources by ensuring there's economic opportunity to create a livelihood, while at the same time putting in protections for conservation for generations to come. So now Canada has announced their development of a blue economy for Canada, and we should have a plan. We have the largest coastline, and we rely on our oceans for food, for economic development, and for survival of our coastal communities. Our ocean sectors contribute about 31.7 billion in GDP and about 300,000 jobs. And in 2019, the farming and fish processing activities were 2.1 billion in GDP and full-time jobs for over 21,000 Canadians. And these are not just jobs, they're careers and they're full-time, and they're in rural and coastal communities where we need it the most. And supporting this blue economy is something that Kate mentioned earlier, is that Canada is signatory to a high-level panel for a sustainable oceans economy. This is an international multinational initiative looking at the role oceans play in global sustainable development. And they've written a report. Their most recent paper is a sustainable oceans economy by 2050. They estimate that investments in ocean economic activity can have an economic net positive benefit ratio of 5-to-1. Increasing production of sustainably sourced ocean-based proteins is a return of 10-to-1. So it's a really smart investment as well. So there's tons of opportunity for Canada and for British Columbia looking at our coastline. And there certainly is, because there's room for growth. Right now, the 71% of the earth is covered by oceans, but only 3% of our food comes from the ocean. And in fact, only 1% of viable ocean is being used currently for aquaculture. And contrary to its name, aquaculture takes up very little water, very little space, and converts food very efficiently. In fact, the ocean could supply over 6 times more food than it does right now. That's 2/3 the animal protein needed for future populations. This panel identified sustainable food production as a major solution towards a low carbon food future. The ability of seafood to meet so many sustainable goals with the economy, economic development, low environmental impact. It's the reason why seafood plays such an important part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And there's consumer demand. The UN FAO projects that we're going to continue to see 7 to 9% increase in demand on seafood annually. And this is really important because we cannot do it on wild capture fisheries alone. There's going to be a balance of wild caught products and also aquaculture products to meet this growing demand. And consumers are savvy. They fully understand the health benefits that seafood has for their diets. And with the rising trend in plant-based diets, we're seeing an increased demand for kelp products as well and kelp aquaculture. And sustainability is shifting amongst consumers. It's very focused on carbon footprint right now. And aquaculture has the smallest environmental footprint of all the animal proteins. So, we look at the expansion of Canadian aquaculture to meet these demands for high quality protein. It could mean a low carbon economic potential. And kelp aquaculture actually sequesters carbon from the environment. Now, I know everybody has seen this graph before. And again, you'll probably hear me say the word balance quite a bit. But right now, approximately half of our global seafood production for human consumption is from farmed products, and it's expected to rise to 60% by 2030. We need the balance of wild capture fisheries and aquaculture to meet the growing demand for seafood. And I think this can be done and should be done in partnership with Indigenous communities, Indigenous-led aquaculture development, not just as rights holders, but also with their commitment and cultural values of sustainability for generations to come. There's increasing interest among First Nations in aquaculture development, seeking that balance, looking for food security. Within Kaya, we have an Indigenous Partners Network, and more I am learning from our Indigenous partners, not just the economic opportunity that aquaculture presents for them, but partnerships with the industry acting as acts of reconciliation. There's been several reports written about this by the federal government on the opportunity that aquaculture presents for Indigenous communities, and the most recent was released in 2020, and it was specific to the Pacific region. That's almost hard to say. We've also seen resiliency within aquaculture during the COVID and the opportunity for economic recovery. Listen, I work for a commercial seafood company, and last year was really difficult in the fresh market and seafood. It really was. But what we saw with some of the salmon producers in aquaculture is that they remained stable, and that was a real sign of resiliency. And Canada has recognized the importance of sustainable seafood production. So the Agri-Food Economic Roundtable to the Finance Minister identified how this sector is going to play an important role in meeting Canada's economic growth targets as a critical part of sustainable economic growth and recovery. And this is just made more important now post-COVID. And I love this slide because nearly half of ocean employment arises from food production. So when we're looking now with the emphasis on food security and economic development in food produces an enormous amount of jobs, it makes sense to build a blue economy around food production that provides economic opportunity. And we have the expertise. Here in British Columbia, we have aquaculture experts in marine and freshwater hatchery, land-based shellfish, kelp, processing, supply sector. And, you know, when I think of the other side of the coin for the blue economy and conservation, the experts that we have within the industry now within hatcheries are going to be critical for enhancement activities. And there's so much opportunity to partner with them to develop enhancement activities. And in fact, they have been doing it. There's many projects happening right now in conjunction with coastal communities and First Nations communities where they're using the expertise within industry to help on the conservation side of things. So just as a brief summary of, you know, the opportunities, we have the lowest carbon profile among major animal proteins. It is sustainable. There's opportunity for Indigenous reconciliation. It provides a secure, safe food supply. There's opportunity for economic recovery post-COVID. The sector is only 40 years old. There's been quite a bit of innovation, but with an investment in innovation, we have so much further we can go. And it's meeting demands for, you know, consumption of seafood without putting the additional pressure on wild stocks. So, you know, we should be leaders, but we're not. What is holding us back? We have not embraced our seafood opportunity. There's a commitment to the blue economy, but there is no plan. There are no set targets. So we are losing ground because of lack of government support. 1996 was 25 years ago, and Canada was the lead seafood exporter. Right now, we are 8th. We have 4 times the viable marine capacity as Norway, yet we produce 4 times less. They are 4 times ahead of us in value of their seafood. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, other jurisdictions have created plans supported by government and targets to sustainably develop their seafood opportunity and have that realization. But we haven't done that here. There's been a lack of investment. We need, you know, to invest in the experts that we have here in Canada. We could invest more in innovation, not just to increase sustainability, which is of course important, but also to increase our competitiveness and increase the value. We need a champion. We don't have a champion. Other ministries such as Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada, they promote their farmers. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA, that's who regulates them. And the AAFC, they have, you know, programs that support marketing, innovation, insurances. But what does seafood have? We fall under a very tiny portion of what programs they have. We don't get to enjoy the full breadth of those programs. We simply haven't invested in seafood. We have not had a plan. But there's opportunity with this blue economy strategy. I really feel this is the vehicle that can help us kind of regain our leadership. And the National Wild Capture and the farmed industries, the Fisheries Council of Canada and the Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance, they came together to create that plan, to put forward a vision and to come up with some targets. And so this is the balance again, the wild capture fishery and the aquaculture industry coming together to create a vision so that we can regain that potential. And the overall vision is to be the top 3 best sustainable fish and seafood producer, not the biggest, but the best, the most sustainable. That's the cover of the report. You can find the report at seafoodopportunities.ca. There's also, I think there's 4 or 5 really interesting videos from Indigenous communities, the academic community, and coastal community leaders throughout Canada talking about what the blue economy could mean for Canada. And then what is our targets? Well, these seem very ambitious, but when you consider we've got an increasing population and Canadians eat less than half the seafood recommended by Health Canada, these are doable. We want to double the value of Canadian seafood. We want to double the economic benefits. And we want to double the domestic consumption of fish and seafood. We're not striving to be the largest, we're striving to be the best. But there are required actions that need to happen so that we can take advantage of this. We need to identify a federal champion to drive the sector. Currently, the Department of Fishery and Oceans is supposed to enable and regulate, like promote and regulate the industry. Some perceive that as a conflict of interest. I don't think it's overly appropriate. So there needs to be clarity within that organization so that we know where we sit. And like other nations, develop a specific organization that mandates growth of this industry. We could call it the Canadian Seafood Development Council. Other nations have done this and have seen great success. There are examples here in Canada with the Agri-Food and Aquaculture Ministry, and develop 5-year action plans that have mandatory reviews, reporting, that would set growth targets, develop these plans with broad stakeholder input, focus on regulatory efficiency, address longstanding needs to support business confidence so that we are on that level playing field with other jurisdictions. By 2025, through marine-based planning, as you heard Charlie talk about earlier, we should have these areas finalized and clarified. We fully support that certain areas should be, not for development and protected, but we need clarity because business needs that clarity. And we should also expedite the Aquaculture Act. We've been asking as an industry for this act for about 30 years. While we see some movement on it, that's great. It still hasn't happened. And the Fisheries Act in which we are currently regulated was never meant for a growth farming sector. A new act is going to help us with a modern framework to help manage future sustainable growth. And we also need for, the commercial side of things, finalize the Fisheries Act regulations. And I would like to add to this, and maybe this falls into where we need the champion, is we need support from Canadians to increase. We need people to understand that we're not eating enough seafood. The FCC, which is the Fisheries Council of Canada, and Kaya came together and did some market research. And the majority of Canadians had very little understanding of the sector as compared to other proteins and consume very little seafood. So I would like to develop more understanding amongst Canadians to really drive that domestic consumption. So we need to do our part. We need to support our local seafood producers, increase kelp in our diets. We need to stand because we can do this right. We can be the most sustainable. And if we do that, we'll be healthier for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was very interesting. I think we've got the right 3 people to start us on a questions and answer. So we'll just open up the Q&A section now and start that. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Kate and Charlie and Jennifer, for those great presentations. I just want to let everybody know that after our Q&A, we're actually going to have a round table so you can engage and bring in, come into the conversation. And I see people like Charles and Cheryl and Deb are here and others, so we can talk about these issues and some of the other issues, things like tourism and where ports fit in. So the first question I have is actually for you, Kate. And the question is, I'm going to read it. If the technology is being used to monitor ocean acidification for shellfish farmers, is there technology that could be used to help conduct the water quality monitoring under the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program to assist in opening new areas or reduce the cost, seeing that the current program is undergoing a modernization?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And Jennifer may be able to add to it. But yes, we are hoping to expand our observations to actually include monitoring for other kinds of pollutants. I know that the shellfish industry has been impacted by waste from ships, for example, and harmful algal blooms. And so we hope to be expanding that to the area of that we are in right now in terms of Bay and Sound. But certainly with the development of more autonomous platforms, they could be expanded to other areas of interest to ensure that there can be collection or new aquaculture sites where we can be assured of the high quality of the ocean water.
Kate, and thank you. And Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
Well, it's funny because that was my question. But certainly one of the bottlenecks that's being experienced right now for growth in new areas for the shellfish industry is getting into the program, the Canadian Sanitation Program, for areas that are currently not monitored under CSSP. And right now that program is going through a review currently, and they're hoping for a modernization. So through my engagement with the DFO AMAC process on CSSP and feedback that we've had through our roundtables with our Indigenous partners network through Kaya, we're looking to identify more cost-effective means of conducting the sampling, particularly from remote areas. It just becomes unfeasible to do the required sampling necessary to get an area open and maintain that monitoring once you're in. So if there is opportunity to learn more about the technologies you have or to look at ways to assist, I think the timing is great while the modernization of this program is happening and while we're seeing increased interest among Indigenous communities in rural areas to solve this issue finally.
Yes, and we're really interested in expanding our partnerships with Indigenous coastal communities, because really they have their eyes on the coastal ocean quite a bit, and by and basically providing them, we do technology transfer so they can collect their own data. So some of those remote areas could be expanded to really to have the Indigenous communities be their own stewards of the coastal environment. So we're interested in working with you on that. So let's follow up.
Let's get together. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's great. And Charlie, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think Jennifer and Kate handled that great. Thanks.
All right. So here's another question that kind of follows on to that. What's your thoughts on exotic species and their competition with wild species when we think about the food industry? Jennifer, you must have some thoughts on that.
I'm not sure I fully understand exotic species.
Non-Indigenous to the coast, I think is the way I interpret that.
Oh, in order to get the approval to farm any organism in this country or province, it goes through quite a bit of research and due diligence before there's even a framework developed to get the license. And then there's certain regulations and conditions to ensure the safety around that. So right now, we'd like to see growth, certainly from my shareholding nation's perspective and the groups that I am, we'd like to see growth and frameworks developed for sea cucumbers. We'd like to see a better framework for the gooey duck, things that you might not see on your plate every single day, but certainly where there's a market for it. And there's definitely potential growth in aquaculture when you look at integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, really utilizing those sites to expand the volume of seafood that you can take off the one space. And so looking at, can we grow shellfish together with kelp, together with potentially, sea cucumbers? And there's going to be so much of an explosion, I hope, with an investment in technology, particularly in aquaculture, that aquaculture can be done in a variety of forms, not necessarily in the ocean. There's also going to be growth in the land-based sector where we can see some of these newer species, if there's a market for it, hopefully develop the regulations around that so that we can expand into other fish that we're not currently growing.
That's great. And Kate or Charlie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. The only thing I'd like to add is we're also looking at how we could potentially add monitoring to for example, the growth of kelp in areas where that may be a growing source of food as we change our culture and what we like to eat. And so that the monitoring would be focused on helping ways to grow these new aquaculture programs faster, and also to, at the same time, begin to assess what we would call the contribution to the carbon economy, how much carbon can be removed or reused in those kind of settings.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, go ahead, Charlie. Yep.
I was just going to say, the only thing I could add there is, like, with proper planning and strategic planning, you can kind of shape that dialogue, where you ought to be focusing investments and innovation and or research to grow certain species in a particular part of the coast, right? And so once you engage people in that dialogue, that helps shape that dialogue or shape the vision, right, for certain areas of the coast, subject to our ability to do it in the first place, given the right conditions and all that kind of stuff, right? But that can help, and we've seen that be realized in some of the areas we have focused, say, zones for shellfish development and or marine plant aquaculture. And so it can be very helpful.
Right. And Vicki brings a good point forward. She's saying the concern with plastic waste from the shellfish industry, and I see Vicki, you're from Cumberland, so we all know what the beaches look like on Denman Island and in the Bain Sound. So it is obvious. Is there any successful adaptations that any of you are seeing, so we're less dependent on the plastic that's being, I guess it's happening through the storms. It's being.
Actually, last year I sat on a panel on the BC Innovation Awards for aquaculture, and there were quite a few presentations about plastic reduction by using alternative compostable materials, some made from kelp, just fascinating ideas. And again, it goes back to that need for investment into innovation, because there are emerging opportunities now to take advantage of reduction in plastic with totally biodegradable materials. And there were several presentations actually from shellfish growers on improving the materials that they were using as well for waste reduction, plastic reduction, and improvement to growth with different technologies that they were developing in innovation.
That's great. Well, we'll hopefully see some advances there in policy and in innovation and product. I think this will lead to the next series of questions, which I think it'll be great to talk about in the roundtable as well, that really talk about the labor shortage, as well as where both undergrad and grad students can take their interest in the blue economy. So the question is there currently a program or funding mechanism for new graduate holders to apply for and or contribute to the blue economy? And the comment is there's a lot of students looking for marine careers currently. And I'll add to that, if I might, just really talk about new careers and new economy careers, as opposed to the ones that we've seen over the last couple of decades. So do you guys have some comments on what you would suggest a learner do as a first career, other than bug Kate for a job?
Well, I don't think there's any specific programs around the blue economy. The blue economy is kind of a new strategy and engagement right now. It's happening with Canadians, with the federal government. So certainly providing feedback to that, identifying the need for programs that can help build that. That being said, a lot of what we do is blue economy, right? Looking for sustainable development in food production, looking for that balance of conservation and economic recovery. Like, you listen to what Charlie's doing on his marine planning. That is the blue economy, identifying the areas for growth and identifying the areas to protect. And so if you look at careers in aquaculture, you look at careers in fisheries or marine planning or the technology and innovation like Kate is doing, that is contributing to the blue economy. And there is quite a few jobs, and there is a labor shortage. That's something that, I think everywhere we go, everybody's hiring. And, within our processing plant, even we're seeing an aged workforce there, that there is several new opportunities for young people to really kind of look at seafood, because that's certainly my interest and need as career development, because there are so many vast careers, whether you're interested in research or production, or you just want a job on a fish line, or you want to be a vet, or you want to be a brand manager. There's several opportunities, and they all filter back into that blue economy of developing, this opportunity while making and living off the ocean while protecting it at the same time.
Charlie or Kate, do you want to add to that at all?
I was just
Sure.
going to say,
Go ahead.
there's good question. I mean, there's a lot of different paths you could go down on that if you want to specialize, if you want something to do something broad. And at the master's levels, there's a few offerings, I think, nationally that you can do sort of a master's in marine and coastal management, right? There's one program at Dalhousie, and there's a program and an international graduate program in the university through the University of Iceland that you can do. And then through UVic, I know that there are specific focused degrees you can do that give you that background academic experience to then have a more applied take of it, either within the public sector or independent through industry. So yeah, it's just a matter of really just sort of searching out the programs at academic institutions and then really finding and honing in on a particular either program or supervisor that meets your interests, and I think you'd find something.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of comments in the chat room about the MyTex program, which really is about matching industry educators with students to actually get them into. So we have one MyTex student right now that's funded through an industry partner, but that could certainly grow as there's investment in the ocean tech as the blue economy, as Canada starts investing in blue economy. And of course, we do hire people once they have their masters and bachelors. So although we're not the only one, but organizations like ours are always looking for really good people. And looking towards the future, I was talking about solid carbon, which is in early stages of technology readiness. But it's clear that there's going to be an increasing need for a workforce that's knowledgeable about the coastal environment as the impacts of climate change expand. And so that I see that as a wonderful career path, because there's going to be people needed to help coastal communities really adapt to what we've already put into the atmosphere, which we've seen in terms of storms. I don't know if for those of you who are still drying out, we just had a pretty long storm very recently that was likely driven by climate change. So those careers will probably be growing as you go forward in the future. And also that's on the adaptation side of coastal climate change, but on the mitigation stage, there will be a growing industry that will be basically developing technologies and approaches for enhancing carbon dioxide removal in the ocean. And that's an exciting new area. It's still in the research area, but that we will see that grow. And British Columbia is well positioned to become a leader in that area because of the fact we have a real-time observation platform like ours that can help advance that technology, but also because we have people who really know the ocean and love the ocean. So I think there's a bright future for a lot of these careers in this sustainable blue economy.
Mm-hmm. And well beyond commercial diving and fisher
yes.
of the earlier generation. It's interesting why I said this is great for the roundtable, because I see people like Deb from the Innovation Center at Vancouver Island University, and she made an earlier comment that it is actually the #1 challenge that she's hearing from the business operators. Somebody else also said that they're having a hard time. So labor is obviously a big issue, and I think when we think about the champion, the investment, and the support that Jennifer pointed out, we might want to add some more thought around careers and education as a focus point, because that seems to be be
Or
be a
even
big
careers in
challenge.
developing the technology to become more automated in areas.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where our company's looking now. If there's this labor shortage continues, how do we increase automation so that we can continue to meet the growing demand?
And the other area is data. I mean, data are what we need in terms of understanding the ocean, and having highly qualified software engineers, data specialists will continue to be a real need, especially as when Jennifer was just talking about increased automation. That's where you really do need to have these highly skilled data people.
Yeah, and it definitely needs a lot more focus than we've had historically. And thanks, Mike, for the MyTax plug. I was just thinking about, kind of putting all these questions together, and I think, anybody that is advising, students, to really encourage a student to keep asking the questions, because places like MyTax and other programs should be uncovered through the just through the personal relationships they have with their advisors and professors. So hopefully that communication channel is open, and people know about things like MyTax.
And also, I mean, if there are students out there, reach out to industry. There's always partnership opportunities for different project ideas. There's employment opportunities that can support you in the meantime. Kate talks about adaptation, and adaptive management is how aquaculture has always kind of operated, and we're accelerating that because the environment is changing, and having those minds on the ground right now and involved in the industry at this time. Not only is it beneficial to the industry, but it also, as an example, I met with a young man who was talking about doing an aquaculture program and wanted to talk to me for 5 minutes just to see if he was on the right track. We talked for 2 hours. He signed up later that day, because there's just so many avenues, right? That were very exciting once you kind of have those conversations about what's actually out there and available.
Yeah, we'll have to build a website on careers that we introduced to the high schools on Vancouver Island. So David brings up a good question, and I know I have this question as well. What are the opportunities for somebody that wants to take on risk as an entrepreneur and invest their own private capital? And maybe think about this outside of the obvious. Like where's the future if we're predicting 10 years out, and what's an opportunity we could innovate on our coast that we could export globally? Anybody have any thoughts on that? And I think that's where the data is so important, and that's why I appreciate the work of Charlie, and what they're doing, kind of identifying some of this.
I'll jump.
Go ahead, Kate, please.
Well, this is a project that I'm leading, and it's early days, but solid carbon is going to be needed globally, and we're developing it right here in British Columbia. And so there's all kinds of elements to it. It's the ocean technology, the actual injection into the subsea floor, and all of the supporting industries that are an analog, unfortunately, to offshore oil and gas production. Because if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, in that industry, there's over 400,000 support jobs just to keep that industry going. So there's going to be a need for negative emission technologies like solid carbon, but all other carbon removal technologies. And I do think that BC has the right kind of citizenry who understand climate change, are interested in moving these technologies forward, have the training. So I do think it's not right away, but that's certainly something down the road. And as I mentioned, these services for adaptation on the coastline. I'll give you one example. We're doing a test on basically what we call biorock, which we're doing a test on it to see if it could be a new product whereby you actually use a small electrical current, and it really pulls elements from the seawater and forms carbonate on a metal frame. And so, for example, in a coastal zone, this could be a product that would provide coastal protection in a way that has a very low carbon footprint. And then it also helps keep the water quality at a very good water quality in terms of ocean acidification. So it's those kinds of innovative solutions that are going to just keep popping up, I think, as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I see Deborah's made a comment here, and certainly the Seafood Innovation Center at VIU is doing some of the work on the on the startup entrepreneurship space. And I think to answer that question a bit more is that I think we have to realize that we're not quite at that entrepreneurial stage yet. Like, we still have to build a bit of an ecosystem here. So if you were going to be an entrepreneur in this space, and I see this with some of the entrepreneurs in the blue economy space already, you actually have to be involved in policy lobbying in the ecosystem. And I certainly, I think we're a few years behind the East Coast when it comes to a lot of that infrastructure in their ecosystem. But we're going to work very quickly at bringing into Vancouver Island. And I know, Kate, you could probably talk to this, but I know in Victoria, they're even talking about putting a Blue Economy Innovation Center in this region of Vancouver Island as well. So things are happening.
I would wanted to mention that it's the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies, and its acronym is COAST. And this is now in its early stages. It's being managed out of SIP, but it's really moving along very quickly. And it's been under development in direct dialogue with the East Coast programs like the Ocean Supercluster and the Center for Ocean Venture Enterprises. So and they're helping, and they're saying they're helping to get that launched very quickly. And that will be the place where we can begin to support new entrepreneurs and new innovations. So keep your eye out for COAST.
Yeah, so I think between the established Innovation Center for Seafood at VIU and COAST in Victoria, those are two good places for entrepreneurs to be able to tap into. And I think Jennifer made a really valuable comment. And I know it's easier said than done when you're first starting out, but really reaching out to industry and looking for opportunities. And I'm the person you come to as an entrepreneur looking for money, and I've been at this on Vancouver Island for a decade. And a lot of people work, they work without the data, and so I encourage people to to look for the opportunities after talking to people like Kate, Jennifer, and Charlie, and as opposed to just starting something thinking it might be a good idea. So yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for offering to speak to people. That's how I interpreted that.
Yeah. Reach out to me. I love it. I just want to add to that point, though, because you did talk about, the need for policy and the need to lobby for change. And that's a big focus of my talk, is the need for that champion. I grew up in the commercial fishery. My dad, he owned a seafood processing plant. He started the snow crab industry for Newfoundland, but he also taught at the university, and he taught a seafood processing technology program. So I spent my childhood traveling all over the place and looking in fish plants all the time. But he traveled to Europe continuously and to Japan, looking at their technologies and taking that expertise and bringing it back. And my father-in-law used to be the mechanical engineer for Fishery Products International. And so he was a contractor that was working with them, and that was his job, to design processing equipment for innovation and competitiveness. And now that university program no longer exists. My father-in-law, he retired as a chicken processor and designing those, because we didn't have the investment in the seafood.
Yeah.
And so if you look back several years ago, when we did have those types of investment in technology, entrepreneurs were, all over the place with new technologies that we could tap into and learn from, and we've slipped away from that. So there really needs to be the support for the sector as well, and pushing for those policy changes to gain back what we have lost. Because, if you look at the CAIA's and the FCC's opportunities report, it's not about being the biggest, right? It's about being the best, the most sustainable, the top 3 in best and sustainable. And that takes innovation, and innovation falls back to entrepreneurs and those brilliant minds to bring forward the ideas and technologies. But together we need to stand and ask for that champion, because there's an enormous room for growth in this sector as a result.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this after, where's the parliamentary secretary engagement, in BC, and I think there are some links that that we can talk about in the roundtable. And certainly, Cheryl's an expert in in local economic development, so we have some expertise we can open that up to. And I think we also have to realize where we are in the process and admit we're behind the time, because one of Kate's staff, Canal, did a gap analysis for us on we were going to take blue mussels and make them shelf stable by dehydrating them basically. And what we found was, there was really no government or industry support on Vancouver Island for blue mussel, whereas back east they were bending over backwards to get his attention when he was doing the work. So that was, that's not good news, but it does kind of give you a bit of a gap that we do have a lot of work beyond the obvious if we want to expand this economy.
But if we can identify the gaps, we can work to fill them, right?
Exactly, which we have to do collectively.
Yeah.
No, it's good. So we'll open it up to the roundtable now, and I think again, please, everyone have their input. But I think tourism is an interesting area that we didn't have a lot of expertise here on that we can talk about, as well as Carl Butterworth and of course Deb Hellback from VIU. Maybe we can have a bit more of a roundtable on the labor shortage, as well as the academic opportunities. I think those are two areas that we could get into. And you'll see, turn on your camera if you wish to talk to the panelists, raise your hand. So Deb, do you want to jump on and give us a bit of a elevator pitch on what you're doing at the Seafood Innovation Center?
I guess I will now, Peter. Thank you.
Carl, you're next, and then Cheryl.
That's a voluntold thing, I guess. Eh?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. It's nice to see you again, and thank you to Jennifer and Charlie and Kate. Good presentations. Yeah, I'm the manager at the new Center for Seafood Innovation at VIU, and our mandate is to help the seafood industry be more competitive and grow by helping them access innovation and other resources that they need. So it's early days. We're doing a lot of matchmaking type work where we're putting companies together with researchers, with innovation centers across the country to help them achieve their goals. And I'll say that the biggest obstacle to innovation, to productivity enhancements, to product development is labor. So when I'm talking to the industry members, which I've done a fair bit of in the last 6 months, the response I get is, yeah, we'd love to innovate, but we don't have any people. I spoke to one company that they're down to less than half the number of employees that they need just to fill their orders. So the thought of doing anything else is just beyond them. So I have an advisory committee, and I've been talking to them about how do we approach this? How do we move